Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to be here today. This is a really special gathering for the launch of my first book, Proud Flesh. Thrilled to have Beth Ann Fennelly, the former poet laureate of Mississippi, and someone whose writing has inspired me deeply as a mother, a woman, a human, a person with a body. And so thankful to the Treehouse Gallery, to Vivian and Walter for welcoming us into their beautiful space, especially on this spring day. I mean, listen to that. Doesn't get any better. So thank you. I think we're ready to get started with our conversation, and we'll do a little reading and conversation, and we'll have time for some questions at the end.
Often when I'm doing work supporting a younger writer, it's a book that I had a hand in shaping, and I feel, a loyalty to a student. It also means I don't really have a lot of resources to support like a 1,000 books in the world because my students are so prolific. But when I read Catherine's book, I knew I wanted other people to find this book, and I knew this book deserved an audience because it was unlike other books I knew about motherhood, and I just kept finding truth in it, and more truth, and more truth, and the writing was beautiful, and it was an important Mississippi story. And I think that this is the perfect place to celebrate it. So I want to echo Catherine's thanks to Vivian and Walter for hosting us in this beautiful gallery, which has given so much to our part of Mississippi and just the state in general. So I hope, in addition to buying one of Catherine's books before you leave, everyone buys at least 4 or 5 pieces of art. And, my birthday is coming up in May. So, keep it in mind. There's some nice jewelry on the counter, Yeah, so, and make sure you take a look around. Okay. So when we were chatting on the phone, Catherine, you told me you were excited to come back to Oxford. It had been 13 years since you'd been here, since Mississippi Teacher Corps, and it made me wonder if you could tell everyone just a little bit about your background in Mississippi to kind of set the stage.
Sure, I'd love to do that. So, as I like to say, Mississippi and puberty arrived at the same time for me. I was in 6th grade when my family moved here from Iowa. Before that, we had lived in New Hampshire, and before that in South Florida, Fort Lauderdale and Miami area. And so I came to Mississippi first as a middle schooler and never thought I would still be here at this point. I figured as soon as I could get away for college, I would. However, my senior year of high school, I began interning for a local alternative news weekly in Jackson called the Jackson Free Press. And I was getting assignments to cover arts and life and culture and feature stories and stories about Jacksonians doing cool things. And I started to get this feeling that my conversation with Jackson and with Mississippi wasn't finished yet. And so I ended up going to Millsaps for college, and after that joined the Mississippi Teacher Corps and was placed in Byhalia, small town of Byhalia, which you're probably familiar with up here. Most people are not so familiar with it, but came to Oxford every weekend while we lived in Holly, or not every other weekend while we lived in Holly Springs for classes and just to visit. But yeah, it has been that long since I finished Teacher Corps in 2012 since I've been back to this area. So it's really special. It feels like a pilgrimage to come here, kind of like a full circle moment, because I actually write about some of my experiences in Teacher Corps in the book. But yes, now I feel like my conversation with Mississippi still isn't finished and probably will never be.
I hope it never is. I'm loving the conversation you're having with Mississippi. So there's a lot of this book that takes place when Catherine, it started when she was 16, and it involves a relationship that she was in for 4.5 years. It was a abusive relationship, psychologically and sexually. One thing that's kind of interesting is you weren't writing about this at the time. It took you 10 years. And I do think the heart has its own clock. And I have noticed with myself sometimes, there's might be a difficult experience and I think I'll never write about it, and I'm just simply not writing about it, and years go by and for whatever reason something triggers or prepares me to go into the place I thought I didn't want to go into. Could you talk a little bit about how motherhood prompted you to return to this early difficult relationship?
Sure. I had always dreamed of being a mother and expected to enter motherhood as well prepared and fully equipped as I could. Like, I had taught every age from 3-year-olds to high schoolers and spent a lot of time with children, loved children. And just by my nature, I have been told since I was a little girl that I'm so patient and such a good listener. And so I felt like, oh, well, this will feel really natural and this is my dream. However, I was totally surprised and blindsided by how the physical and emotional rigors of new motherhood stirred up some of that prior trauma, which was incredibly painful. And there's a lot of shame around that. I mean, how terrible does that feel that becoming a mother evokes some of the pains of being in an abusive relationship? But things that I couldn't even understand as I was going through it for the first time when I became a mother. But I'll just name some of them, like intrusive thoughts, fears of my baby, getting hurt or being harmed by someone, a sense of hypervigilance and anxiety as well, the intense physicality of new motherhood, pregnancy, feeling things moving within you in places you can't name, being touched by things that parts of another being you can't name. Then toddlerhood as well, extremely physically rigorous time of, developmentally appropriate for them, but lots of big feelings, lots of kicking, thrashing, head butting. It's a very physical experience, and I hadn't had that experience of feeling like on the defense with my body for so long too. And of course, there's the thing that we say, or I've heard a lot about new motherhood, that, my body doesn't feel like my own. And so I began to wonder, when did it feel like my own? Has it ever really felt like my own? And it wasn't until the second time that I went through pregnancy and postpartum again that I had a little more distance and a little more insight. And around that time, it was also, it was 2019. We were about a year into the Me Too movement, or at least the viral part of the Me Too movement. And stories of sexual assault and sexual violence were coming out every day, more and more stories, women courageously coming forward. And I began to kind of put it all together in my brain to map how much my previous experiences of intimate partner violence had stayed with me in surprising ways, and were coming out not just as memories, but as lived, embodied experiences. But in that, I also noticed that many of the conversations around sexual violence were about the immediate aftermath of the abuse, not so much about how we rebuild our lives and come into new relationships with our bodies and our sexuality and restore trust in our relationships. And, what happens when survivors become mothers? More than 1 in 3 women are survivors of sexual violence and intimate partner violence, teen dating violence. It often starts in the teen years. And so I knew that I couldn't be the only one having these kinds of experiences. And I wanted to do my best to put words to the intersections of those experiences, in the hopes that we can have more conversations about it like we are here today, and that fewer women feel like they're alone with these experiences.
Catherine, we were just talking about putting words to the experiences. Maybe you'd share with us, I think you picked out 3 short segments overall. Why don't you read one so everyone can get the sound of your voice in their ears?
I would love to. So the first passage I'm going to read to you comes from a chapter called The Skin Bridge. And this, to give you a little context, this is in my second postpartum experience, when I'm coming into new understanding of my body after a very common childbirth wound, a second-degree vaginal tear. I'm learning to speak these words for the first time to friends about what I'm experiencing with my body. It's not generally polite conversation to talk about your vaginal tear, but here we go. We're gonna delve right into the material of the book. The skin bridge, Morgan exclaims on the phone as I sit in the purple chair in the nursery. Oh my God, the skin bridge. My friend Vera had this after her birth. Wait, you know about the skin bridge? This is a thing? Vera had it? I stand up from my chair and walk between the changing table and the window. I immediately feel like less of a freak. Vera has a high-powered director job and is a vibrant woman who lowers into a full squat to throw her arms open wide to greet her toddler at daycare. Just knowing that Vera is living her life with a skin bridge in her pants makes me feel like less a mutant. She birthed her baby in a hospital, so I also know this could have happened no matter where I birthed, no matter who repaired me. As Morgan talks, my right foot rubs the shaggy white carpet in the nursery, my toes smoothing the tangled clumps that have become gray with constant foot travel in the last 3 years of motherhood. 2 worn, packed trails diverge at the corner of the rug from the door, one to the changing table and one to the purple nursing glider. The compacted shag tells a story of the care of bodies, other bodies. She tells me about her recovery from her tear that striated up to her clitoris and how she was afraid of penetrative sex for more than a year. She said, "When I was 6 months postpartum and still in so much pain, my doctor looked me in the eye, took my hand and said, 'Morgan, this is common, but it is not normal. You do not need to live with this pain. You do not have to accept this pain like so many women do.' When I move certain ways, sharpness still pinches me like a rat trap at my vulva. Other times, a sudden tug at the tightest spot of the repair halts me, as if I've snagged on a serrated edge of a saw. As Morgan and I talk and even laugh about the scars of our bodies, we give ourselves the name Vagangelists. I feel us actively breaking a cycle of wounding, the silence. When Morgan and I first met at a community mother blessing event, we were both pregnant with our first babies. She would later tell me that in a room full of white women, she was immediately drawn to me as someone racially ambiguous or ambiguously brown, like she was. She was closely connected to her Puerto Rican and mixed heritage, and to hear her name her early perception of me as a mixed woman and her sense of belonging in my presence made me feel like part of a mixed community in a way I had never felt before. It feels right that now we're also coming into an open and shared understanding together of our private bodily changes in motherhood. In nature, moss drinks up rainfall, absorbs toxins, and cleanses the soil in a way that allows the other plants around it to thrive. It's why my artist friend, Sarah Janae, collaborated on a grief-focused art installation called Moss Couch, a living repose made of moss and flowers patchworked over a reclaimed couch. The artist note says, "Like grief, moss is persistent. It also plays a vital role in the development of new ecosystems." When I get off the phone, I feel as if the moss couch has embraced me. Birth changes bodies. Motherhood leaves its tendrils in our flesh, creating a new ecosystem. Maybe my body is healing messily, not because something went wrong, but because this is the order of bodies. Creation and destruction are clasped hands within the same circulatory system. When we're in it alone, our minds can tell us that our healing is messier than the healing of those around us. But our bodies are not machines, predictable, uniform, and following directions. Our bodies are wild, defiant, and willful. They keep on absorbing. They keep on remaking.
So one of the things I thought was really interesting about this book is it's not just a story of trauma and dealing with trauma. There's a large emphasis on finding a way forward. And, I admired the creativity that went into your process of finding out how to be at home in your body, how to have like sexual health, how to be the person and the mother that you wanted to be. And some of those techniques, were things I wouldn't have thought of. One I thought that was great was the vagina portraits. Is that something you want to talk about?
Oh, sure.
Or not.
Yeah, I will. I would love to. That's actually probably my favorite chapter.
Oh, really? I love that chapter too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was so fun to write, and I actually kind of used a different form for that. But I'll tell you about that process first. So, and it's the perfect space to talk about it at an art gallery.
Yeah.
So, let me back up first and say that in my second postpartum healing process, that was my first vaginal birth. After my first vaginal birth, I mentioned I had a second-degree tear, and there was a lot of complications with the healing, a lot of overgrowth of scar tissue, and I had to undergo 8 treatments over 6 months with this chemical called silver nitrate, which was essentially burning the scars away. So I was having these medical encounters with my body every 2 or 3 weeks. Very painful process. It would take about 10 days to heal from each one fully. And at that time, I was struggling so much with my body and then also my past, and it felt like there was just so much pain I was contending with. It felt like half of my time was when I wasn't with my kids as their primary caregiver. I was going to therapy, to talk therapy. I was going to pelvic floor physical therapy. I was going to my doctor for these treatments. And I started to feel like I am going to fall into despair with the state of my body and motherhood the way it stands right now. And I felt I really needed some kind of positing, intimate witnessing of that part of my body as well. And so my husband, Lloyd, who's here, he's always loved to draw. And in fact, when we got married, his dad came over to me on I was in my wedding gown, came over, and he kind of said to me quietly, "Please promise that you'll encourage Lloyd in his art, to keep up his art." And over yeah, it was really sweet. And over the years, I'd asked him to say, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I would say it would mean so much to me if you would draw me something beautiful. Or he loves to write too, so I'd love a poem or a letter with, some sketches. Then, in this postpartum time, circling back to that, I got the idea really on the spot to ask him. One night he came to the door, and I was massaging my scar tissue, my vulva scar tissue, with coconut oil, like my doctor had told me to heal and to help with the rigidity of the scar tissue. And he was just in the doorway taking it in, and I said, "Would you draw me?" And so he had a little resistance because it felt very searingly intimate, putting him on the spot like that, but he said yes. He drew my vulva, and then after that I asked him if he would continue doing that for 30 days. So it became this project called the Vulva Portraits, and it's a whole chapter in the book. And in that time, he was doing 1-minute or 2-minute sketches often of that intimate part of my body where trauma had happened, where babies had been born, our babies, where, pleasure had happened in the past too. But I think when we think of our healing journeys, a lot of times we think there's some path that's been trod for us that we can just follow. Someone else has figured out how to do it, or someone else can guide us through what will help us heal. And it's much more common to hear now, healing is not linear. However, the way I see it now, healing is also an extremely personal and creative process. Like, what if we think of healing as a creative process? And with the Vulva Portraits, that was something that in that moment, I just knew I needed and wanted this intimate witnessing of my body. And then how powerful it was to see myself depicted on the page. We never know what it is that will be a generative healing practice or pathway for us. But I do hope that chapter encourages people to think outside the box and to give themselves permission to go with something that might feel a little weird, uncomfortable. But real intimacy often does take us to uncomfortable places, to vulnerable places. So doesn't have to, I don't expect everyone to ask their partner to draw their genitals for 30 days, but who knows what...
This is not going to be a workshop. Everyone take out your pens. No, kidding. Yeah, right.
But I do think that these kind of creative healing processes also give way to unexpected intimacy, like how being witnessed in that way allowed me to witness his body, like the male body, the patriarchal body, in a much more intimate way as well.
So you just said that healing isn't linear, and I'm just going to ask a writer question instead of a subject question for a second, but the book is not told chronologically, and I was thinking, why is this so effective? Because normally we think you should tell a story as simply as possible. So every chapter includes some of the material when you were 16, 17, 18, and then chapters, the same chapter will include, with the transition, you writing through this material 10 years later. And I remember at one point reading the book that you were saying how difficult it was to leave this abusive partner, that you were 16 when you became partners with this 24-year-old man, and that on average it takes a woman 7 times to leave an abusive partner. And I was thinking that cyclical nature is its own rationale almost for this non-chronological structure that keeps looping back and trying to move forward and looping back, and the healing is too. Do you want to talk about any aspects of the writing of this book, or did you plan it? Did you write it chronologically and then muck up the chapters? How did it find this final form?
I love the layers of that question. So the story has, first of all, there are 2 story arcs. The chapters alternate between my postpartum healing journey, my experiences in motherhood, and then the second story arc is meeting me as a 16-year-old and following me in my young womanhood as I'm entering this abusive relationship and experiencing it and coming out the other side. Originally, it did not have those 2 story arcs. However, I found it really difficult as a writer to work in enough of the past story without feeling like I was backlogging it with too much that happened before. And also, as a student, I was studying or just experiencing healing through somatic experiencing. And there's this idea of pendulation in somatics, of alternating, moving, having to experience, an experience of pleasure, an experience of pain, that we're pendulating between these 2 places. And also titration of, just taking, if you think of it like chemistry, 1 drop at a time and seeing how that chemical reaction happens. And I think I was influenced by those somatics practices as well, of how it's healing to, both as a writer and thinking about my reader, not wanting to overwhelm them with the intensity of the material, to be able to alternate between these storylines and have them be in conversation with each other. But if you're feeling like you're having too much of one of them, then you get a little relief maybe from the other.
Yes.
And nature kind of plays in that way too, the way that I bring nature into, both story arcs, but each of the chapters from the past, from my girlhood and young womanhood, is named after and uses the natural world of Mississippi as a lens or as a metaphor. And I found that also came a little bit later in the writing process to incorporate that, but that actually made writing about the past stories much more tolerable, to bring in these living natural elements and see what might kudzu teach me about the way an abusive relationship devours you. What might a hummingbird, a ruby-throated hummingbird, which can fly forwards and backwards, what might that teach me about my wisdom and my vitality in the way that I escaped this relationship and the choices I was able to make? And so through that process, bringing nature in also allowed me to ask new questions, which is what I think what makes memoir writing very exciting a lot of times, when we start with a question or many questions that we're trying to untangle, rather than just a story that is known and set.
Right. Is there a passage you want to read that kind of illustrates these ideas?
Yes, I would love to. A squirrel out the window chases another squirrel up a loblolly pine, and patches of bark drop down. I open Facebook and see a friend has posted an ultrasound photo with the caption, Google's, "How painful is childbirth?" It's a pregnancy announcement. A laugh quakes from me. I also searched for answers to that question before giving birth, both the first time and the second, since my first baby didn't come through my vagina. Today, I feel a new question squeezing through, thrumming. I prepared for the pain of labor. I trained for birth like some train for triathlons. I summoned a team of 4 women wise to the energy of bursting water bags, thinning cervix, and stretching labia. They arrived with baskets full of comfort and safety measures, peanut balls for wedging my legs, rainbow weave rebozos to sift my belly while I was on hands and knees, and sticks of amber honey to crack open and bead onto my tongue. I meditated several times a day for weeks until my cells seemed to whir. I made a playlist of drum beats for the mood of shaking baby down. I made a playlist of soothing shanties. I made a playlist of empower the fuck up queen bee anthems. I welcomed pain onto my bed sheets, into my body, like a most honorable guest. Directly under the crown of dried flowers haloed with the white lace ribbons on the wall, my baby broke from me like a Eucharist, I on my knees. My pain smelled like clary sage and was accompanied by a silky cloth blotting my cheeks with wetness. How beautiful my pain presented, how I courted it and shaped my body to frame its edges. I can't question my pain tolerance. A 10.5-pound baby with a 99th percentile head carved through my vagina. I traveled to my limits of sensation and beyond in birth, a slither force rolling me out of myself. During transition, when I fully dilated, it felt as if my insides were being sucked out by a cosmic vacuum while I spun in total loss of control. I do not like this, I told Lloyd when I found my voice. I do not like this. With that same resilience at my center, a new invitation contracts the room. You showed up for your pain. Will you show up for your pleasure too? Without the birth moan, the great rock heads of my babies splitting me, and the asphalt heat of the silver nitrate, pleasure would feel like a luxury, nothing but a sugar cloud melting on my mouth. But today, pleasure calls to me from my torn skin like a dare, like a sound I've never made. Only because blood is snaking down its ankle do I believe pleasure's here for me. Thank you. So this is also from the pleasure tolerance chapter. This gets into the intergenerational part of the story, and we, the legacy of being women and mothers and bodies that come from other women, mothers, bodies. I didn't need ghost stories as a child because I knew my Nana's body. In high school, I interviewed her for a school project, and I flew to Florida for the weekend to record her story. Palm leaves swayed in the warm breeze while we sat on her porch with tall glasses of milk splashed with Kahlua. The microcassette tape turned for 11 hours, and Nana Jojo's words patched together unevenly, her French accent stretching the syllables. I had intestinal tuberculosis, and I was full of tumors in my uterus. The doctor said, "It's you or the baby. Not both of you will make it." I said, "I choose my baby. I'm having this baby." They put me to sleep. I was asleep when she was born. People still thought she wouldn't make it when she came out. A priest came to anoint her with her last rites. She was all yellow, skin yellow, eyes yellow. What's it called? Jaunisse. They gave me a hysterectomy after birth. Everything was too messed up from surgery and the TB and the tumors. They wouldn't let her drink my milk. They said it was no good because of the TB. The details lined up like stars as my Nana talked, as if she remembered the story by looking up at the night sky and finding a constellation, flecks of light to make order of big darkness. Of all her stories, I know this one best. In a hospital in Oran, Algeria, in 1954, my Nana Jojo, Simone Schmidt, is 13, and her abdomen gapes open. An appendectomy has gone wrong. Her intestines were punctured. A nurse brings her a glass of sloshing red to drink in the morning, horse blood. Next, the leeches, placed one by one on her open wound, sucking, attaching. Another nurse fishes for worms in her belly. Prepare an outfit for her. Call a priest, the doctor tells her mother, Marie. 9 months she stays in the hospital bed with her belly an open wound. Her mother rides the bus to visit every day while her father gets drunk and smells like the perfume of other women. The Algerian War for Independence begins while she lies there. First, she hears the bombs, and then the clapping and shouting from the Arabic patients segregated on the other side of the hospital. The nurses put, what's the word? The thing from the mother and the baby. Her hands formed a circle in front of her, the size of a cake. Placenta? Yes, placenta. She shook her head and rolled her eyes for forgetting. They put other people's placenta on the whole of my belly. Fresh placenta from the baby who had just been born. My grandmother used the word miracle to describe it all. Her survival, my mother's survival, the fact that I was able to be born at all. By the time the interviews were over, I understood that if you want to believe in miracles, you must look straight into the grotesque eye of a wound until it is transfigured. The line between the horrific and the miraculous could be as thin as breath.
Thank you, Catherine, so much for sharing your beautiful book. Thank you all for turning out on this lovely afternoon. Please visit and look around at the art, and Catherine will be in the back signing if you want something signed, and we appreciate your support today.
Thank you. I'll be sitting over there selling books and signing if you already have a book. I would love to sign it and just talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.